buttery flavor in their bacterias. And so as a result, now when I go out and buy a commercially available strain of bacteria, I don't get these buttery flavors in it. So we managed to find an old school strain of bacteria, and we use oh, what's going on there? So we, yeah, don't know what's happening there, a bit of feedback from something. Yeah, so we found this old strain of bacteria, and we use 5% of that in our barrels, and that gives us just a little bit of butteriness without being over the top with butteriness. And, you know, you can imagine that in the 80s, why this guy said they were super buttery, because if we had done 100% of our Chardonnay with that bacteria, it'd just be over the top. I mean, it's definitely obvious in this wine, but not over the top. The other thing is the oak levels in there is we don't use any new oak at all. It's all 1, 2, and 3 year old oak. And I find that first year oak is just too much for it. And I just want to, I want to do 100% oak, but keep it a little bit more subtle. And by using older oak, that's how we do that. So, you know, Chardonnay is all about balance, a little bit of oak, a little bit of butteriness, a little bit of fruit characters, but not too much of anything. And if any of you guys have a really nice like fromage dauphinois or a really nice triple brie sort of in front of you there, that's a great match for this Chardonnay. And it sort of brings out those buttery flavors, but at the same time it brings out a lot of the fruit flavors as well. And so it creates this really nice mix of buttery, fruity characters in the mouth when you have it with that nice creamy brie or something. Next is our rosé, and I don't have a bottle of rosé here with me for some reason. I must have drunk it. I love the rosé, and when there's a bit of sun, it's a good time to be drinking it. But the first thing that we do is we actually put our rosé in a little 500 ml bottle, and the idea is that 2 people can drink a bottle over lunch and still be under the limit. Because rosé to me is a bit of a lunchtime wine. You know, I was sitting on my deck actually eating some charcuterie and some antipasto, and I thought, you know what, I just have to make a Pinot Noir rosé to go with this. And so I did. And so that's where the rosé was born. The other thing you'll notice in your glass there is how dark it is. It's quite a dark rosé for what's trendy at the moment. Now, trendy at the moment are those really light sort of Provence blush style rosés. And, you know, I've never been one to follow trend. I love texture in my wines. So you probably notice of a lot of our white wines that you can smell them, you can taste them, but you can also really feel them in the mouth. They've got this real textural component. And to get that with the rosé, I actually need to leave it with the skins and stems for a longer period of time. And so a lot of people don't realize if I get a red grape and I squeeze that grape, the juice and the pulp inside is actually white. So to make a red wine, I actually have to ferment it with the skins, which extracts all the color. To make a rosé, I leave it with the skins for a certain period of time until I get the color or the flavor or the texture that I'm wanting. And, you know, for those sort of light blush Provence style rosés, they probably spend maybe an hour or 2 on the skins before they're pressed off. For ours, I leave it on the skins and I keep tasting it until just here in the middle of my tongue, until I get this really nice furry feeling on the middle of my tongue, a nice textural feeling. And then I press it off. And that's usually at around about that 10 to 12 hour mark, which is why it's a little bit darker than most rosés. But it's bone dry. It's got that nice texture. It's 100% Pinot Noir rosé, which gives you those really nice strawberry characters. And, you know, it is a little bit of a marketing challenge for us having a dark rosé, because people see the rosé and they immediately think of Matoush rosé. And so they think it's going to be sweet, but it's not. It's definitely a bone dry rosé, and great match for sort of antipasta and those sort of things. Those lunchtime meals, you know, it's definitely a lunchtime wine for me. I love rosé. I drink a lot of it. Less so now in weather like this because it's starting to get a bit cool. In weather like this, I drink things like reds. So we're going to slowly move on to the reds. The first red we will taste is called the Lost Flock. And that's something special to us. I don't know where the sheep have wandered off to. You might be able to see them Ray back there in the background. But the sheep are really integral to what we do in the vineyard. So when you convert to biodynamic or organic, you're making a decision to do it from, I guess, a philosophical point of view, because it costs more to make your grapes. And if I take a wine to a bottle shop, a $30 Shiraz, for example, and then I take an organic Shiraz to the bottle shop, it's still valued at $30. So we're not it's starting to change a little bit. We're starting to get a little bit more value in organic and biodynamic products, but historically it's not been that way. And so we're making this decision to grow grapes in a more expensive way because we want to be good for the environment, because we want to be good for health, and that sort of the reasons, because we don't want to use any non-organic inputs. And we make the decision to do that even though we don't sell our wine for much. Anyway, the sheep have totally changed it for us. In, I think it was 2014, we had a caterpillar problem in one of our vineyards, and the biodynamic philosophy says that if you're having insect problems in your grapevines, it's because you don't have enough animals on the property. So we started experimenting with sheep, and we first tried Dorpers, because you didn't have to shave them or shear them. They're sort of shedding, and that was a nightmare because those things are pretty much like goats. And so they ate a lot of the vines. So that experiment didn't work so well. We then decided to go with a grazing variety. And when I talk about grazing, what that means is a variety like the next ones we tried were Merinos. And so they're grazers. So they'll only feed in their feed zone until they run out of food, and then they'll look up outside their feed zone. So the Merinos, okay, unfortunately the vineyard was here on a Merino, which is still just inside its feed zone, but we worked out if we put electrical wires underneath, it stopped the sheep going near the vineyard at all. The only thing was, when the power goes out, it's amazing how much a sheep can eat in one day. So that experiment kind of worked, but not so well. Eventually we found the breed which we have now, which is called the Hampshire Downs. And if you can see them, they're the ones that the English breed. They're quite a rare English breed in Australia. There's not many around. So we started with 10, and now we're up to 80, and we need 200. So they've got the little black faces. They're a little bit shorter. They're grey. Their graze is the same as a Merino, but because they're a little bit shorter, they're only about an inch or two. So the vines sit here, just outside of their feeding zone. And so now we don't have to worry about the electrical wires. And then, so we've solved our caterpillar problem. And a byproduct of that, which I didn't even think of, and I don't know why, is guess what? Sheep eat grass. And the most expensive thing for us in the vineyard is actually managing the grass. And that's where all our labor and all our expense is for biodynamic and organic vineyards, is because normally you have to either mow or cultivate almost every second week to manage the grass. But now we just have the sheep in there doing it. So all of a sudden, by introducing our sheep, our vineyards have become cheaper to run because of that. And so it's put us in a really good stead. The second thing is we also have wool and meat. So 2 more incomes off the same block. We're now getting quite good with the sheep, and there's a process that we do every year around about January, which is called leaf plucking. And what it is you can imagine a bunch hanging down like this and a leaf over the top like that. Well, we want the sun to penetrate the bunches. So we remove that leaf so that sun can hit the bunch, which helps with flavor development and also helps with disease control a bit. And normally we hire all these people to rip off the leaves, but what we worked out is at a very specific time in the grapevine growing cycle, when the berries are still hard and green and the shoots have lignified. And that means if I grab a leaf of a non-lignified shoot, I rip and pull that leaf, the whole shoot comes off. If I grab a leaf of a lignified shoot and pull it, only the leaf comes off. So when the berries are hard and green and the shoots are lignified, we have the sheep in the vineyard, and we actually leave them in the block they're in for about 3 or 4 days after they run out of food. And so they start looking up because there's no more food in their feeding zone, and they will eat the first 2 leaves off the vineyard for us and expose all our bunches to the sun. And so with another saving with the grapevine, with the sheep there. So now our biodynamic vineyards that are run with the sheep are actually by far our cheapest vineyards to run. and our, I find we get much more structure in the wines out of them. Plus we get wool and meat as extra income. So it's been completely changed the landscape for us, these little woolly workers of ours. And the other great thing about the Hampshire Downs is they're a breed that are called roamers. So you can sort of see behind me, or they're starting to go over the hill a bit, is they don't really flock together like merinos. And the problem with flocking together is you get sheep camps and you get these tracks through the vineyard of compaction. And these sheep are roamers, so they usually spread out all over the vineyard. You never see them together, so you don't get camps or tracks through. It's great for the vineyard. A nightmare when I go to shear them because I always miss two, and there's like two woolly sheep wandering around. I just did a vineyard tour then with some people, and they were asking me who the two big sheep were, and they're the two that missed it last time. They're not any bigger; they're just super woolly. And so I, in the winery, stacked the barrels according to their variety. So all the Shiraz barrels are together, and all the Merlot barrels, and all the Grenache barrels. And this wine we're about to try, the Lost Flock, is a blend. It's a GSM. It's a Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre, Merlot, Petit Verdot. And so the barrels are stacked all over the winery, which reminded me of the sheep being all over the vineyard. And so that's why I call this one the Lost Flock. So that's like my long story for the name, but it's really important, the sheep to us. They really have fundamentally changed everything we do. So the Lost Flock was designed for my drink a bottle in front of the fire red. I was actually drinking a big Barossa red at the time, which I love, but I sometimes find them a little bit heavy. And so I wanted to make something that was just a little bit easier to drink, a little bit softer, you know, and so a little bit more delicate. And so I came up with the Lost Flock blend. And as I said, it's simply a GSM plus Merlot and Petit Verdot. And it's just my easy drinking, everyday red. And it's probably the red I drink the most of. It's probably the one I take to parties the most. And that's because, you know, some people like Shiraz, some people like Merlot, some people like Grenache. Well, if you take a blend, everyone can find one thing in the wine that they like. And so that's why I take it to parties a lot. But yeah, just my long, soft, easy drinking red. My favorite one is this one, which is the Pinot Noir. Actually, the other thing I should mention is we've got two labels. So we've got this one, which is the Sustainable Series, which has the tractor. And you should have it on your notes, the Sustainable Series and Creators Series. So the Sustainable Series is 100% off our biodynamic blocks. And then we've got the Creators Series, which has the barrels on them and the sheep. And so the Creators Series is not necessarily 100% off our biodynamic blocks. So sometimes it's in blocks in conversion. Sometimes it's blocks that we like varieties, for example, like Shiraz. It's way too cold down here in the Southern Highlands for Shiraz. So we work closely with some growers, some hilltops. And so when things aren't off our biodynamic blocks, they go under the Creators Series. So Lost Flock, some of those varieties came under the Creators. The Pinot, our reserve Pinot. I love Pinots. They're kind of a bit like Chardonnay, where everything you do as a winemaker is really obvious in the final wine because it is such a light red. And so I guess a good Pinot is seen as an icon of winemaking. Now, this is made in a really old school, funky Burgundian style. So heaps of whole bunches, heaps of stems in the ferment. I leave it with the skins and stems for about 2 or 3 weeks afterwards. And so when you first bottle this wine, it's really resiny and bitter, and it doesn't taste good at all. It's 100% designed to be that really funky French style, which takes a good 4 years to settle down in bottle, but then just ages and ages and ages and ages after that. So it's now been 4 years in bottle. I released this when it was 3 years in bottle, still had a little hint of bitterness at the back palate. I drink a lot of coffee, so I quite like that bitterness in there. But the French usually will wait to that 4-year mark where that bitterness disappears, and it just creates this really big, funky style of wine. If you're a bit of a Pinot drinker, you know, you'll know how big and funky this is compared to a lot of those beautiful, light, delicate ones we make here. The other thing is this is made to age. So it's already just starting to get little hints of that nice sort of, it's like a cigar boxy character they talk about in aged Pinots. And I don't know if you've ever opened a cigar box, but it's kind of a woody character, but it's like quite a sweet wood. It's not like a dry wood. Just starting to get hints of those, which I'm really excited about because they're the characters we're trying to chase in the Pinot. But this is probably my baby. The other thing you may notice in your bottles is a little bit of cloudiness in it. We don't filter this, so it's all unfiltered. The other thing is it's vegan as well. It's one of our vegan wines. So we're slowly edging our more premium wines into that more natural winemaking style slowly over time. Especially now that the market seems to be able to accept cloudy wines and more natural wines. And so, you know, we do lose a lot of flavor in those final commercial cleaning up of a wine. And so that's why I sort of try and push that way a bit. So that's our Pinot. Next, we're going to move on to our Shiraz. And Shiraz, it's funny, this is probably the most Australian wine we make is our Shiraz. And most of our other winemaking techniques, as you probably can taste, is they're quite European. Because I am a big fan of that texture in the wines, I use those techniques a lot more, which gives us the texture in the wines. And the problem with those techniques are they usually take a lot longer in bottle for the wine to settle down. And so it's a lot longer winemaking process. You know, even our whites, our youngest white, 2018. So that's been about 18 months in bottle already. So I just find that you really need that time with these techniques in the bottle to really develop the flavors again. They get bottle shock quite a lot, and so they just need that time. So that's one of the problems with those techniques. But I love, you know, this is originally Tractors Vineyard was a passion project on the side. And so I did things the way I wanted to drink them and the way I wanted to make them. And that's just grown and grown. So now, even though it's the main thing that we do now, we still follow those original techniques because that's the way I like to drink the wine. So I'm just lucky that other people like to drink the way I like to drink them because now we can sell them as well. So the Shiraz, I had to do a Shiraz. Australia was made famous for Shiraz. The first job I ever had as a winemaker when I left school was with a company called Clonakilla, and they're really famous for their cool climate Shiraz. And so this just brings back so many memories of working for Clonakilla and the great Shirazes that we make around Australia. And this is just a really typical cool climate Shiraz. It's exactly what you'd expect from a cool climate Shiraz. It's from the Young region up near Hilltops in New South Wales, about probably about 2-3 hours from here. And the funny thing with Australian Shiraz is they really don't like to be messed with a lot. So over my years, I've tried lots of different winemaking techniques with Australian Shiraz, and probably the most simplest, easiest way to make a wine is the technique that works best for Australian Shiraz. It just doesn't like being fiddled with. Destem it, ferment it without the stems for 3 weeks, but with the skins, press it off, goes into barrel for 12 to 18 months into bottle. Really clean, simple winemaking, but it always ends up with the best results. And one of the things I love about cool climate Shiraz is this structural component you get. You know, warm climate Shirazes are great. They've got all this flavor and complexity, and they just sort of go, wham, there you go. There it all is. And you're just like, wow, look at that. Cool climate, they just got a bit more delicacy, and they got this beautiful structure where right down the middle of your tongue, you get this nice textural furry feel right down the middle of the tongue. And that gives the wine structure, which holds all those flavors together. So when you have a cool climate wine, they've got all these flavors and complexity, but they just slowly hand them to you down that structure. And so they're a lot more delicate way of giving you the flavors. And that's one of the things I really love about cool climate wines. And one of the things that I think really shows a good region for cool climate Shiraz. And, you know, for me, Young, Hilltops, Canberra, and Heathcote are probably my 3 selections for Australian cool climate Shiraz. But, you know, really typical cool climate Shiraz, you definitely would not be upset if you like cool climate Shirazes, because that's, you know, smack on what you'd expect to get. And I'm not tasting with you today because I'm out of the vineyard, and so I've got to drive home. But these virtual tastings, I've actually it's been a chance for me. I've never tasted my wine so much, because if I'm at home, I can actually sit down and taste them with you guys. And every time I taste the Shiraz, I'm like, oh, geez, I love this wine. I need to drink more of it. And so I think I'm going to finish the rest of that bottle off when I go home later tonight. We're now going to move on to our Cabernet. Now, I am a huge fan of aged Cabernets or aged red wines, and it goes back to my uni days when I was really lucky. When I went through uni, I was kind of before the trend to be a winemaker. So I think there's about 5 people at in my uni when I went through, and then there's about 2 years after me, there's about 200. But what it meant was, one of the people teaching us, who was a master of wine, he it meant he could pull a bottle out of his cellar and we could all taste it. Whereas if he had 200 people he had to share wine with, he couldn't just grab a nice bottle out of his cellar. So I was really lucky. He tells a story. His name was Nick Williard, and he tells a story about how he was down in Adelaide, and they were pulling down this old pub, and he looked in this skip, and at the bottom of the skip was this little half bottle, and he jumped in and he pulled it out and he brought it in for us to taste at uni, and it was a 1956 McGill's Burgundy. And so for those of you who don't know, the McGill Vineyard was the original Penfolds vineyard in Adelaide. So this is Penfolds before Penfolds, and it was an amazing wine. And these aged wines have these flavors that sound terrible. The descriptions just don't work. Soy sauce and fish sauce and composting guavas and this sort of thing. But for some reason, they just taste so amazing. They just work so well in the palate. And so I've been obsessed with making a wine that can age really well. And we look around the world, probably the most famous sort of light red region that ages amazingly well is Bordeaux. And they created a technique they call post-ferment maceration. So that's why we call this post-mac Cab Sav. And this technique, what it means is you leave the wine with the skins and stems after the ferment finishes. So a ferment usually takes about three weeks with the skins, and normally in Australia might leave it a week or two afterwards and press it off. This technique, it spends 12 to 18 months on the skins before we press it off. And what that does is it creates a wine with huge amounts of fruit flavor, and it creates this real solid tannin structure. So one of the problems when we age a wine is they can crack up. And when a really old wine cracks up, you just end up with all these gaps in the palate that don't taste. So they almost taste like acidic water. And what's happening when a wine cracks up is it's losing its structure. If you can imagine a young Cabernet, you ever got those really grippy sort of tannins that make you go like that? They're kind of a sharp, edgy tannin. Those tannins are short chains. And when you age that Cabernet, those short chains join together into a long chain, and a long chain is nice and soft and velvety. And that's one of the processes that's happening when you age a red wine. Now, the problem is, let's say I started in a bottle with 100 short chain tannins, and they join together to 50 long chains, which join together to 25 even longer chains. Well, eventually we run out of tannin structure in that wine, because we need 100 of something, 100 tannins in there, and we've only got 25 of these really long chains. And so that wine starts to crack apart. This post-ferment maceration, there's so many of these short chains floating around in the tank with the skins and stems. They push together into a long chain, and a long chain, that nice soft velvety chain, it's also more stable. And so then when we bottle that wine, we're bottling it with 100 of those long chains rather than 100 of those short chains, which means that we've got a structure that's going to develop and be more stable over time. So I've created a wine that's super fruity with super structured tannins. So in theory, this wine should age for 50 years plus, just like in Bordeaux. And I say in theory because I don't know anyone who's actually used this technique to this level in Australia. So when I made this, you get to about the 3-month mark, and you go to the tank and you take a sample out of the tank and you taste it and you think, holy hell, I've destroyed this wine. It tastes awful. And at that 3-month mark, what's happening is all the tannins and all the structures coming out of those grapes into the wine, and it tastes awful. And so when I called around all my old winemaking friends and all lecturers and things, they all said to me the same thing. Yep, we got to about the 3-month mark as well, and that's when we pressed it off because it tasted awful. Well, this was a side project then because I was contract winemaking, and this was my passion on the side. And the textbooks and the knowledge says to leave it longer. And I thought, well, I'm going to do it. So I left it longer, and I got to 12 months and it didn't taste much better. And I got to 18 months and I thought, it's a tiny bit better, but still not a great wine. And then put into oak for 12 to 18 months. It's not much improvement. And into bottle. And then at about that 18 months in bottle, out of nowhere, bang, all this fruit character came out. It was unbelievable. And so much so that even for me, it was almost too fruity. It was like a Sauvignon Blanc. It was that fruity. And so I have no idea how the French worked out this technique works, but it gives you lots of fruit, gives you lots of tannin. It's now 4 years in bottle, and it still smells really like a young Cabernet. It's got that cassis, tomato leaf, capsicum character of a young Cabernet. And it's been 4 years in bottle. So it's doing exactly what it should do following this process. So in 50 years' time, we can jump on another one of these Zoom sessions and I can tell you whether the technique worked or not. Because no one's done it, I don't know. But so far, I'm really excited about this wine. And I tried it when I was tasting it probably 2 years ago. I was telling everyone, oh, I'm really excited to taste this in 5 years' time. And, this is definitely going to age for 20 years. It's now been another few years on, and I actually think it's aging way better than I expected it to. This is just going to age a long, long time. And I'm really excited now to be trying this in 10 years' time. That fruit character is just hanging around. It's fantastic. So doing exactly what it's meant to. And at the moment, with that beautiful cassis and capsicum and tomato leaf, it's a really good match for roast lamb. It's probably one of my favorite matches. One more to go, guys. Good one to end on. Our 8,000 vintages. So the oldest record of winemaking in the world comes from a country called Georgia in Eastern Europe, and it's dated 6,000 BC. So that's 3,000 years before Egypt. And they do a famous red style in Georgia called Kinsmorelli. Now, I was lucky enough to spend 7 years consulting in Georgia. So I do 6 months in Australia, then 6 months in Georgia for 7 years. So this is my homage to the history of wine and homage to Georgia. This is my Australian version of Kinsmorelli. Now, if you've been to Georgia or you've been lucky enough to try some Georgian wines, you'll know what I mean when I talk Kinsmorelli. If you've not, well, now you can be. But it's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like a light port. It's got that nice berry character and fruit flavor like a ruby port, but then it's got that deep complexity and structure that you get from some of the tawnies and that nice Christmas cake character, but it has nowhere near the alcohol. It's still 12.5% alcohol. So it's quite a unique style, really good match for that like American style barbecue, that really smoky style barbecue, or a mature cheddar, or a really dark sort of bitter chocolate. I reckon they're great matches for this wine. But we call it 8,000 vintages. And if you are interested in history at all, there's a really good book called Ancient Wine, which talks about how they prove the oldest record of winemaking in the world. And it's from a little town just outside of the capital of Georgia. Don't ask me the name. I can never remember it. Shurigori or something like that. But don't quote me. So that's our wines, guys. I hope I didn't rabbit on too much. If you have any questions, please yell out, type them up. If you don't want to yell out, you're welcome to put them up on the chat. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Please follow us on Instagram and Facebook, because I am going to keep doing these virtual things. Yes, I'm open now we're sort of open in the cellar door for tastings, but we've had really good response from our virtual tastings. The difference is we're going to go live on a Zoom meeting rather than a Zoom webinar. And we're going to keep doing them because, it's great means you guys can sit at home, you'll meet some new people like you're being in Asillador, but you don't have to worry about designated drivers. You could be on the other side of Australia. You can even be now, because next week we actually launch our tastings in LA. And so all of California, we can do the wine tastings. So you can sit and experience a tasting like this with your friends overseas as well. So stay tuned. We're planning on doing some virtual tastings of our sparkling wines and doing some demonstrations of our sparkling wines. Guys, I'd love you to come and visit us someday down in the Southern Highlands. I'd love you to jump on our shop. You've all been sent a little voucher code that you can use in our shop. Please don't get confused. It takes you to the Vincenia bottle shop, but that is us. They send us the orders. We just have a terrible website. I can make wine, I can look after a sheep. The website and that sort of side of things is not so great. Thank you very much, guys. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy the rest of your long weekends. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Just say thanks.
I might hang on. I might mute myself and I'll hang on for 2 minutes in case anyone has any questions.
Thanks,
See you
Jeff.
later, guys.
Really appreciate it, mate. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh dear.